The vast majority of critical decisions in criminal justice happen in the field, entirely unobserved by direct supervision. The lone patrol officer or dispatcher makes calls that alter lives in the dark. This creates a unique operational challenge. We have to figure out how an agency ensures ethical conduct and operational excellence when there is no supervisor in the room. Welcome to Module 6 of AJ 220, Ethics and Leadership in Policing. This module completes the leadership core of the course. Our objective is to examine the practical application of ethics in those completely unobserved environments. We will step through this by looking at organizational dynamics, the specific strategy of community policing, and finally, the 7 core competencies of ethical leadership. Because policing operates largely out of sight, an agency cannot rely solely on a massive rulebook to enforce behavior. True organizational integrity requires deeply ingrained internal frameworks. To understand those frameworks, we first have to understand how authority functions. Formal leadership is authority derived strictly from rank. It comes with stripes or bars and documented organizational accountability. Informal leadership is influence earned organically through competence, expertise, and peer relationships. Smart agencies recognize informal leaders as the true engines of squad culture. Rather than bypassing them, successful command staff identify and collaborate with these networks to drive organizational goals. This dynamic directly affects how rules are followed. Let's define compliance. Compliance is adherence to a rule driven purely by external pressure, like a pending inspection or a watching supervisor. The fatal flaw of compliance is that it immediately weakens the moment that direct supervision disappears. Commitment is adherence driven by a deeply internalized belief in the rule's fundamental purpose. You follow the policy because you actually believe in the standard. The primary strength of commitment is that it holds up unobserved. As supervision drops to zero, external compliance plummets, but internal commitment remains completely stable. Because criminal justice work is largely unobserved, agency integrity depends entirely on transitioning personnel from a culture of compliance to a culture of commitment. We see this requirement clearly in community policing. Community policing is both a philosophy and an organizational strategy anchored in partnership, proactive problem-solving, and decentralized decision-making. This strategy places a distinct leadership demand on line officers. They must actively exercise leadership outward, building strong relationships directly with the community to solve problems at the source. It places an equally heavy demand on command staff. They must shift agency performance metrics away from traditional, purely reactive measures like arrest counts. This policy shift creates objective friction. Reactive metrics are clear and easily measurable. Proactive metrics are much harder to quantify, but they actually solve underlying community issues. Transitioning to proactive metrics inevitably meets internal resistance from personnel who are used to traditional stats. Pushing this change through requires sustained follow-through from leadership. This brings us to internal chain of command dynamics and the concept of the leader as follower. Followership acknowledges that nearly everyone in a criminal justice organization is simultaneously leading subordinates and following superiors. A supervisor's followership, specifically how they actively respond to their own superiors, is constantly being observed by their subordinates. How a supervisor models followership is the primary way they teach their own subordinates what healthy, constructive organizational participation actually looks like. Building personal commitment and constructive followership relies on individual capability. The course outline of record identifies 7 core leadership competencies that serve as the building blocks for ethical leadership. Competency 1 is knowledge. This means practical mastery of the job, like maintaining a deep understanding of current case law and agency policy. Competency 2 is courage. We explicitly distinguish this from physical bravery, which is an expected baseline in the profession. We define this specifically as moral courage. This is the willingness to make an unpopular operational decision despite facing peer disapproval or significant career risk. Competency 3 is communication. This covers everything from active field de-escalation with an agitated subject to writing clear, precise incident reports. Competency 4 is personal character. This is the habit of maintaining absolute integrity in your conduct, both on duty and off duty. Competency 5 is responsibility. This means fully owning operational failures without shifting the blame onto your subordinates or external circumstances. Competency 6 is decision-making and problem-solving. A concrete example is effectively triaging multiple conflicting priorities during a chaotic, critical incident. Competency 7 is professionalism. It is important to understand that this is not a standalone trait. Professionalism is the active synthesis of the previous 6 competencies operating together. True professionalism is the ability to maintain all of these competencies simultaneously when you are under extreme operational pressure. Let's map these competencies onto a single practical scenario. A shift sergeant is sitting at a desk reviewing routine body camera footage. The footage shows a highly well-regarded, popular officer using unnecessarily harsh language with a distressed resident. The sergeant relies on knowledge of agency policy to identify the violation and utilizes communication to plan a constructive debriefing. This creates a critical friction point. The sergeant must use moral courage to correct a popular peer, knowing full well it carries the risk of informal backlash from the rest of the squad. The sergeant relies on responsibility and personal character to ensure the standard is upheld impartially. Executing this choice is the decision-making required to demonstrate true professionalism. Ethical policing requires moving past formal, reactive compliance and building personal commitment, sustained daily by these 7 competencies. To see how agencies actively cultivate these traits, read the assigned Fortenberry article regarding the development of ethical law enforcement leaders. Then proceed to this week's discussion board and answer the prompt: which competency is hardest to sustain under real pressure?